Hey, Eric, jumping in here at the start. We had some audio issues while recording that we were not aware of until we started listening to playback. We've done the best we can to clean up the levels, but this will sound a little different in places than our usual episodes. We apologize for you fans. It is still a fun episode. We hope you listen to it, and we'll be back with a regular sounding episode in December. Have a great one. People in Upper Warden keep getting murdered, and the people from Lower Warden are suspects. Can't we just settle this the old-fashioned way? Oh yeah, murder is the old-fashioned way. This week we are talking class warfare.
Family relations.
Why does everyone like Danny so much on this episode of
Welcome to Midsomer.
Hello, and welcome to Midsomer, the podcast where we dissect all the mysteries, the murders, and the many weird things about the long-running hit TV show, Midsomer Murders. I'm your host, Eric Buscher, and with me as always is my co-host, Eileen Becker. Hi, Eileen.
Hey, Eric. Today we are talking about A Tale of Two Hamlets, the fourth episode of the sixth series. It originally aired January 24th, 2003. It was directed by Peter Smith and written by Alan Plater. It has nothing to do with the play Hamlet. Let's head up that hill. No, I mean downhill. Wait, uphill. No, downhill. I'm running up that hill.
Don't get us. Okay, there's such things as song rules. Spoiler warning: we will be discussing the events of this episode, including the identity of the murderer. So if you haven't watched it yet and don't want to know who done it, pause this and go watch it. We will still be here when you get back.
I've put a little surprise in there for you. What? Tiny soup song, your favorite Peruvian marching powder?
We open as people dressed in Victorian outfits race across the grounds of a manor house. It looks like we are back in time. No, wait, Joyce Barnaby's there. Okay, so this is some kind of cosplay for the opening of the small hamlet of Upper Warden's brand new Ellis Bell satanic experience. 120 years ago, a man named Ellis Bell walked out of his family manor and into a small summer cottage to write a book called The House of Satan. The original novel was a treatise on the corruption of the rich, but it's been turned into a hit horror movie starring Upper Warden's own Larry Smith. Smith is there to help launch the experience, and he doesn't really want to do it, but his manager Frank coaxes him with promises of cocaine. Smith walks outside, greets the crowd, walks to the summer cottage, and then dies in a massive explosion. Cocaine kills people. Barnaby and Troy travel to Upper Warden to investigate. Dr. Bullock is already there, having scooped Larry up into a bag. He says it was a plastic explosive, but it is impossible to trace. Troy informs Barnaby Larry Smith was an up-and-coming actor and a member of the Smythe-Webster family, Upper Warden's upper-class masters for 1,000 years. The head of the family is Rupert, with his third wife, Wendy. No, wait, she's the fourth wife. Then there's middle brother Simon the Vicar and his wife, who are Larry's parents. And then Frank, the agent, is also the youngest brother. None of them seem too broken up about Larry's death, and their general attitude seems perplexing and frustrating for Barnaby. Meanwhile, somehow local handyman Phil Harrison manages to get to the manor despite it being an active crime scene and meets Danny the chef at the back door. The two seem to be good friends who also take pleasure in pilfering the Smythe-Websters' pantry. Joyce got to talking with Danny at the event, who informed her that Ellis actually wrote the book in Lower Warden, and then it's been covered up because Upper and Lower have been in conflict for centuries. Upper Warden takes all the money, leaving Lower Warden to struggle and resent. And also she found out that Danny's mom just died, but he still wanted to show up for the opening. Also, his specialty is meatballs. Danny's a chatty guy, and he seems to get along well with Rupert, who he visits with as he brings him some food. Neither of them seem to be grieving Larry, and it comes up that Danny's mom was a midwife in the area who attended at Larry's birth. Turns out Frank isn't just the agent, he's also the producer of The House of Satan, which is the highest-grossing UK finance movie in the last decade. Also, Larry's death will be good for the film because not only will they get the insurance from his death, but they can cast a new and now cheaper actor to star in the upcoming sequel. Barnaby brings Frank along for the worst press conference of all time. It's set up in the church's Sunday school room. The first question comes from a Lower Warden tabloid reporter, and the second comes from the writer of the Upper Warden weekly newsletter who uses the opportunity to rail on Lower Warden. Barnaby manages to escape when Troy pulls him in to deal with two women who have been fighting at the flower memorial for Larry. Turns out Larry slept with a lot of women during the filming of the movie. The detectives learn that a local man named Darren had videotaped the explosion, and they track him down to a gorgeous bookstore. Troy takes him for a drink at a pub to get the tape, labeled The Shining, and to find out some gossip. Darren is a film buff who dreams of becoming a director and was hurt that he wasn't hired to work on the movie. He tells Troy that Emily, one of the women from the fight earlier, is in a relationship with Phil. The tabloid journalist helps Emily rewrite what happened with Larry for some headlines. Rupert takes Barnaby into the basement to kill him. I mean, give him the tour of the satanic experience. He might as well just kill him, because the experience turns out to be a room with some weird lights and loud sounds, otherwise known as a 90s rave. Then Barnaby and Troy visit the Vickers and see a graffiti reference to Leviticus 18:16, a Bible passage that hints that someone slept with their brother's wife. But which brother? And which wife? Rupert and Frank meet up in the woods for some mysterious business that involves a bag of money. They argue about what to do, and Frank wins, meaning they leave an empty bag with a note that says, "Screw you" in it, to be picked up by a mysterious motorbike man. They then try to shoot him, but miss. It's probably not the smartest idea for them, as the next day Frank goes to work out and mysteriously keels over dead on the exercise bike. Well, it's time for a little tourist info. Eileen, tell us a little bit about the Wardens.
The Wardens. This is the only appearance of both Upper Warden and Lower Warden, because, you know, where one goes, the other one goes too. Upper Warden, located at the bottom of the hill, has the Smythe-Webster estate and all the money. Lower Warden, which is up the hill, seems to have all the garbage. You can visit an amazing bookshop, the Ellis Bell Museum, the House of Satan experience, and a poorly wired gym, to be honest.
I feel like that's like the starting point for this episode, which you're right. Like the title is very weird. Is it makes you think that it's going to be about Hamlet, but is instead it's about, like, I didn't remember this episode at all. And I was like, oh, is this one of those theater ones where it was like, it's like some two competing guys trying to play Hamlet or something? And I just couldn't remember it.
I remember it, but I never remember it under that title. I remember it as the episode that opens with the big explosion.
I remember, like, once the explosion hit, said, oh yeah, this also has the one where the guy dies from soup. All this episode pivots is on the kind of the class warfare, the class distinction between the two wardens. Which I also thought it's weird that Upper Warden is down the hill.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you think about it, like, all this, the garbage from Lower Warden would roll downhill into Upper Warden.
Yeah. And usually something down the hill is less desirable because it's often in a floodplain and it doesn't have the views that up on top of the hill would have.
Yeah. And just, I mean, that's the phrase. And, you know, I will use the cleaner version of it. Crap rolls downhill.
Yeah.
But it's obvious that this whole episode is about the distinction between the two. It's like, you know, you have that sort of the Upper Warden, and whenever there's like grief, like when you get the grief parties for the Smythe-Websters, every time they find out one of their family members died, they just sitting there outside on their little tables, sipping tea, no emotion, no nothing. Whereas anytime something happens, like when you see sort of the reaction of the Lower Warden people, it's very emotional and humane.
Yeah.
And I find that weird because it just feels like the writers actually prefer Upper Warden.
It's weird because I see that there's a lot of editorial comment on both, neither being ideal. But I think Lower Warden definitely gets the short end of the stick. It's interesting structurally that we do not see Lower Warden until almost exactly halfway through the episode. We meet a lot of people from Lower Warden who are working in Upper Warden, but we never get there until about halfway through the episode.
And I also feel it's interesting is that while we don't really see a ton of the streets of Upper Warden, we see a little bit around the bookshop. But we get this walking tour through Lower Warden, which
Mhm.
is, I mean, it's clearly depicted as a poor, gross slum where people just throw their trash outside the windows and like just don't seem to care at all about any, like they don't, they really, it really felt overkill. Like
It did feel like it was overdone. It was obviously meant to be the village where the people who worked for the manor house lived, because that was a very common thing to do. There was a manor house and there was a small village attached to it, and it was often pretty slummy. But, 1,000 years ago, that was. Somewhere in the 20th century, it should have been upgraded a little bit.
yeah, I mean it just felt though just like, look at these poor, look at the, like, Upper Warden, yeah, sure, they're emotionally closed off and they're rich and they're up their own, their heads are shoved up places, but at least they're not living in filth. Like it
Yeah.
felt, it really, not only did it feel just like a stereotypical, like this is how poor people live.
Mm-hmm.
Poor people don't just throw garbage just out into the street or whatever. They just don't, it, that's more of an infrastructure thing. Like if they had maybe even played up the idea that the reason that there's like Lower Warden looks like that is because Upper Warden has cut all their trash things and refuses to, like, cut all, like, they get to have trash picked up once a month because that's what Upper Warden has
Mm-hmm.
chosen to pay for. That's one thing, but instead it's just because it's like you're just wandering around and you're just seeing like, oh, these are people that live in filth.
Yeah. And it almost seems judgmental because it is of their own choice. They're throwing their garbage out the window and they're leaving shopping carts on the side of the
Right.
road and crap in the middle of the place, and
Yeah.
pregnant cats are wandering around.
There's no God in Lower Warden.
There is no God in Lower Warden.
Great line. This episode had some weird writing, especially with like the characters, but I loved it.
I did too, and I loved some of the cinematography actually in it as well.
Yeah, there's a shot later on in the show where Barnaby is sneaking up to the windmill, and it switches to like his POV. Like the camera is like becomes his POV,
Mhm.
and it's just kind of, it's wonderfully well shot. It
Yeah.
had the feel of like some of the great film thrillers.
Yeah. And there's that shot after after Frank's murder, that swoops down from the top of the manor house, looking down at them sitting there, the four survivors sitting there with the empty chair where Frank would sit.
Well,
And I just thought that was really wonderful the way that went down. And as you pointed out in your notes, it had a very Wes Anderson feel to that.
Let's talk about the Smythe-Websters. They are a big part of it. Those grieving parties
Mm-hmm.
has a very Wes Anderson, Royal Tenenbaums sort of feel. All sitting, staring one direction towards the camera, kind of communicating in sort of weird little quips, but not
Mm-hmm.
like nobody is emoting.
Yeah.
Like they've just like two people have just lost their son. They've all lost their meal ticket, and nobody cares.
Yeah.
The women that Larry slept with
Yeah.
showed more emotion about his death than any member of his family.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so yeah, the Smythe-Websters, the rich family who rule, I guess, Upper and Lower Warden. I mean, rule's the strong word, but they have all the money and all the power.
Yeah. And there's this whole 1,000-year tradition thing, which tends to imply that they came over with the Norman invasion. So, which, after 1,000 years, you'd think the British would get over that, but they kind of haven't.
Oh, and they had the rules. It was like the firstborn son
Yeah.
becomes the lord of the manor.
Yeah.
Second son becomes the vicar, and then the third son joins the crusade. But like, if you're that second son, you just got to be like, man.
Yeah. And that is actually not an unusual path, though often it was like the third or fourth son that would join the church. That was like the offering to the church. Yeah.
I thought they were like, I thought they were just an interesting, very classically British. We're not going to talk about what we're all angry or annoyed or upset about. We're just not, even though this is like a family that clearly detests each other.
Yeah. It was very stereotypical, but done in a way that was really very well done.
Yeah, I thought I think again, this is an odd episode. The writing is a little odd. Some of the acting is a little odd.
Mm-hmm. And it's weird because it's very formulaic in the 1, 2, 3 murders that we've talked about, but it works around that formula in an odd way.
It feels like they're just like, well, let's create some weird characters and let's see how they interplay. Like characters like Darren or Danny, Sarah. It's a great one. Sarah's like, we're going to talk about her in a minute, but that, fascinating. Fascinating. I don't know why I'm talking like Linda from Bob's Burgers. Fascinating characters who it felt a bit like Troy and Barnaby trying to interview them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there was a little bit of improv, just like be obstructionist, but be polite about how you obstructing. The way Barnaby reacts to the Smythe-Websters, the way Troy reacts to Darren. There's a lot of just like that clenched teeth smile, kind of like, I really don't know what to do here.
Yeah. And I think the cast really works this well, this strangeness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's some real outstanding people in it that we will talk about.
I love the detail in the episode. Larry Smith used to be on a TV show about East End gangsters called Diamond Geezers.
Yeah.
And known for his East End accent.
Yeah. And he's really a upper crust Midsomer boy.
I feel like it's a sly reference to some TV show, but I don't know what it is. Listeners, if you know what TV show they're teasing about with Diamond Geezers, please let us know, because it sounds kind of fun.
Yeah, we'll have to check that out.
Let's do the cast highlights.
Okay. Well, Christopher Good played Simon the Sexless Vicar. He's got a long career on stage and screen, and he's most well known for his lead role in The Famous Five. And he's appeared in A Bridge Too Far, Gandhi, Doctor Who, and his final role was in an episode of Foyle's War. So very respectable resume there. Next we have Phoebe Nichols, who played Laura, the vicar's wife. She's done a lot of theater, starting back in the 70s with an acclaimed production of Whose Life Is It Anyways, as well as roles in The Cherry Orchard and Three Sisters. She's appeared in the films Women in Love and The Electrical Life of Lois Wayne, which was actually pretty good, and on TV in Brideshead Revisited, Gulliver's Travels, Shackleton, Downton Abbey, and A Very British Scandal. Oh, and she's the mother of Tom Sturridge, currently starring as Morpheus, the Dream Lord, in the hit Netflix show The Sandman. I thought she was very good.
I did too. Like, again, she doesn't get a lot to do till the second half.
Mm-hmm.
But that scene where the scene where she's talking to the detectives in the church, wonderful scene.
Oh yeah, really terrific. Jonathan Hyde is memorable as Brother Frank. He's an Australian actor, a graduate of the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, and a member of the Royal Shakespeare Company. He was an original cast member of the classic British news satire, Not the 9 O'Clock News. He's appeared in films like Titanic, The Mummy, Jumanji, and Richie Rich. He's worked a lot with Guillermo del Toro in the last few years, appearing in his film Crimson Peak and his TV shows The Strain and Troll Hunters. A couple fun facts. His nickname is Nash, and according to IMDb, his trademark is his rich, smooth, baritone voice.
It's in there.
Leo Bill was the slyly awkward Darren. I thought he was so fun in this role. He's appeared in small roles in 28 Days Later, Gosford Park, Kinky Boots, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and The Fall. He's appeared in a number of Mike Leigh productions like Vera Drake, probably because his parents are the actors Sheila Kelly and Stephen Bill, who appeared together in Lee's Play for Today, Nuts in May. Leo is next appearing in the miniseries Funny Woman.
All right. Then we have Joe Stone Fewings, played the lovable Danny. His first credited screen role is in an episode of Shrinks playing Daniel. He also played a Danny in a series called Mine All Mine, but sadly the TV show Trust didn't get the message and cast him in the role of Dennis.
Mm.
He also appeared in The Crown, Father Brown, New Tricks, The Misfits, The Hollow Crown, and most recently in the Sister Boniface Mysteries. He's a member of the RSC, does a lot of theater work, including playing the lead in the parody play version of The 39 Steps, starting around 2008. His wife is the actress Nancy Carroll, who has appeared in 2 Midsomer episodes. Alex Lowe played Phil. Now, he's performed in Jonathan Creek, Saxondale, Peep Show, The Thick of It, and My Week with Marilyn. He also does the voice of Joe Sparks and Professor Pickles in Fireman Sam. He has appeared in 3 films with Kenneth Branagh, Peter's Friends, Much Ado About Nothing, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And then next he's going to appear in the show Dodger. But none of this is what he's best known for.
Ooh.
In 2005, he created a character called Barry from Watford, who would call into the Ian Lee radio show in London. This character became so popular with listeners, he eventually expanded the character into a live show called Let's Talk to Barry, which included audio clips from comedian and Doctor Who actress Catherine Tate. Now, he now has a weekly podcast with this character and has appeared as him in several TV shows. He also created a character called Clinton Baptiste for a show called Phoenix Club, who has also become so popular that he has his own podcast and YouTube channel. And Alex, would you like to come on to Welcome to Midsomer at some point and create a character? Because apparently that might really boost ratings.
We have several return visitors in this episode. Ronald Pickup, who also appeared in The Magician's Nephew, played Rupert Smythe-Webster. He studied at RADA and was a member of Olivier's National Theatre Ensemble. His very first screen appearance was a tiny role in the very first series of Doctor Who. He was the lead in a show called The Life of Verdi and appeared in Fortunes of War with Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson. He was the voice of Aslan in the 1988 adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and he played the Archbishop of Canterbury in The Crown, Neville Chamberlain in The Darkest Hour, and his final role was in a film called Schadenfreude playing the Gambler. He sadly passed away in February of 2021. Next we have Beth Goddard, who played his wife Wendy, and she appeared in the episode Dark Secrets. She is best known for appearing in the sitcom Gimme Gimme Gimme. She appeared in X-Men First Class, Poirot, Casualty, and A Touch of Frost. She's married to the actor Phil Glenister, best known for the shows Life on Mars and Ashes to Ashes. He's done no episodes of Midsomer, while she has done 2. Doesn't seem fair, does it?
Nope. Rebecca Johnson, who played Anne, appeared in the episode Vixen's Run. Although she's appeared in Jonathan Creek, Holby City, and most recently Call the Midwife, she's probably best known to people for playing Rob Brydon's wife in the Trip series. There are a series of TV shows in the UK. Over here, they get edited down into movies starring Steve Coogan. And Brett Raylander is a common face in Midsomer. Just like in this episode, he played the uncredited role of police sergeant in the episodes Death in Disguise and Blood Will Out. It's a role he's played on shows like The Vice and London's Burning. Now, his last role was in the late 2000s, where he played Brainiac in Brainiac Science Abuse.
Ooh.
And I think he stands out as an uncredited police sergeant. I do just want to say, is like, you know, that's the kind of like important crowd work that like these shows would not function without him in the background doing what he needs to do. So
yeah, saying the occasional line and handing Barnaby some piece of evidence.
Well, I mean, we've seen what Midsomer looks like in the COVID world when they're not allowed to have people on site. It's a very different experience. Like, you could not have had that opening scene where all the people are milling about for the explosion.
Yeah.
You could not have filmed that last year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the village star this week is Anne Reid in her only Midsomer appearance, but she's clearly a standout. In a show that could be known for being just a tiny bit over the top, she was subtle in this role. Her first major TV role was Valerie on the long-running soap opera Coronation Street. She played the role for 10 years and was incredibly popular with the fans for her relationship with the character Ken Barlow. She left the role because she didn't want to play just one thing for her entire life. After a few years away from acting to raise her child, she returned for small roles and guest appearances in things like Doctor Who, Casualty, and Heartbeat. In 2003, the same year as this episode, she starred in the film The Mother, about an older woman who initiates a sexual relationship with her daughter's boyfriend, played by a pre-James Bond Daniel Craig. I would totally do that.
It's an amazing movie. I saw this movie on video after it came out, and it's an incredible performance. It's a really strong. It's a very dark, complex drama about a woman who's recently lost her husband, and she's dealing with her grief, but also dealing with long-standing desire. And Anne Reid has a performance in there of such emotional complexity.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Well, she was nominated for a BAFTA and won the London Film Critics Circle Award for the Best Actress for that performance, so it was definitely recognized. After that, she appeared in Hot Fuzz, Cemetery Junction, and would have appeared as a lesbian headmistress in Love Actually, but her scenes were all cut from the film. For some reason, it didn't fit in with the rest of it. I don't know. It just seemed weird. I would love to have seen her roles in that.
Oh yeah, but there's enough. No offense, there's enough story. Love Actually.
There is enough, yeah. But still. She recently appeared in the show Sanditon and Years and Years. She was also named Oldie Pinup of the Year at the 2014 Oldie Magazine Awards. I think her performance in this is so good. She brings so much to the role of Sarah Prouty that you're really rooting for Sarah in this.
Yeah.
You think, yeah, I buy everything that woman is saying.
It's interesting, kind of going back to the idea of there's a lot of stuff that can be over the top. Like some of the Smythe-Websters behaviors are really over the top, but everything that Sarah Prouty's character is, it's grounded. She's a woman with a lot of kind of class resentment, who is trying to keep her family's memory alive and out of the clutches of the distortion of history. Big believer in sort of workers' rights. I think they say she's communist in there, and that goes back to the idea that Lower Warden has a real socialist communist bent, because I believe there's a picture of Lenin.
Yeah.
I guess what it is she's so good and so grounded that no matter what scene she's in, you don't take your eyes off her. Even if she is just standing to the side of what the action is, her reactions are so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's fantastic. And she's really one of the, I think she is probably reason number one why this episode is as good as it is.
Yeah. I would definitely think that she brings it to a level that and we have talked about how the writing is odd and weird, and we really like that, but she takes that and works it to the point where it feels natural, and it's the only way it could have been. I can't think of anybody else in that role.
No, I think she's just very good.
Yeah.
Before we go to the halfway break, let's talk home life, because Joyce's big scenes are right at the beginning of this episode.
Yeah.
Again, does Joyce have too much free time?
Yeah, she's there for the explosion. She gets a short scene with Tom at the beginning, kind of giving him some info. She does the info dump that is usually the coroner's job. And then she has a thing at the end where she could have had an info dump and didn't.
But let's also just point out, the beginning of this episode, she is dressed in Victorian costume for some kind of publicity. Why does she care? Why is she there dressed up as Victoria things for the opening of something called The Satanic Experience?
I don't know. That whole first scene, I'm not exactly sure what the point is, because they're filming it, and apparently the people on one side are in costume and the people on the other side are not. They're the girls in their modern costume, kind of it's going crazy over Larry Smith.
I mean, there's a lot. It took me 20 minutes in the episode to get kind of the definitive answer. Is is the movie out or the movie not out? Because like the
Mm.
poster at the poster on the side of the house at the beginning says coming soon, but I guess that
Yeah.
was for the Satanic Experience, but it looks like a movie poster saying coming soon.
Yeah.
Some of the dialogue at the top makes it seem like the movie may not be out yet. It took me a while to really kind of figure out, is the movie out or not? And then it's like the highest grossing UK fine. It was like this was a lot of qualifiers there. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with the second half of A Tale of Two Hamlets. And we're back. Let's dig into the second half of A Tale of Two Hamlets.
Danny. You think Danny's still the keen on her? Always found him an amiable soul.
He's a dead soul now.
Dead? What are you talking about?
Someone killed him. Round about the time of your visit.
They can't kill Danny. Everybody likes Danny.
Bullock informs the detectives that Frank died from heart failure, but Barnaby notices weird scorch marks on his palms. Turns out someone ran a car battery through the gym's electrical wiring and electrocuted him. The woman running the front desk of the estate/hotel is the only one who shows any real grief or distress in this entire episode as she discovered the body. Turns out pretty much everyone had keys to the building, so there's no way to narrow down the suspects. Frank's family has another grieving party and still shows no grief at the loss of their brother. After having to hear lines from The Wind and the Willows, Barnaby finally lets this family know he's had it with the lies and will get to the bottom of this. Troy goes to the windmill where Phil lives to talk to him. Phil says he's not too bothered by Emily sleeping with Larry and admits to having experience in the army with explosives. Phil explains he's doing a roofing job at the manor, and that's why he has access. Darren also works at the manor, doing the late shift. Is the manor the main job provider? Troy also meets with Danny, interrupting him meeting with the crooked reporter. Danny is an ex-convict who says he likes the Smythe-Websters because they gave him this job. He gets along well with Rupert. Everyone likes Danny. He even shows Troy the expensive shotgun he keeps in his locker. He gives Troy a present for Joyce Barnaby, his meatball recipe. Barnaby makes his first visit to Lower Warden and discovers a beaten-down village with trash lining the empty street and stray animals roving. So I guess it's the Midsomer slum? He finds a museum for Ellis Bell and meets its owner, Sarah Prouty. She explains that Ellis was born out of wedlock in Lower Warden to a mother who worked in the manor and was seduced by a family member. She's a diehard socialist and not happy with how they took his social novel and turned it into schlocky horror. She tells Barnaby that Jack, the Upper Warden bookstore owner, was the first one to propose a movie to the Smythe-Websters. Oh, and Barnaby finds the yellow paint used on the vicar's house. The detectives visit Jack, who admits to having been hired by the Smythe-Websters to adapt the film after he brought the book to them. But his adaptation was scrapped for the horror film angle, so all they kept was the name and didn't pay him. Jack also happens to be the armorer of the local militia, which means he has access to a lot of guns and bombs. One box of Semtex is missing, and Jack tells them that Rupert also had a key. They run into Wendy on the street, and Barnaby asks her a bit of a rude question about whether she slept with Rupert's brother. She denies it as politely as she is able. Phone records show that among Frank's final calls were some to Phil and Sarah, so they split up. Troy is going to keep Phil occupied at the Lower Warden pub, and Barnaby will check out the windmill. On his way to the pub, Troy overhears Rupert trying to pay off Sarah, who tells him too little, too late. He then heads over to the pub and plays a game of pool with Phil. Meanwhile, Barnaby decides to climb up the back way to the windmill and sees the motorbike man arrive. He sneaks up on the rider and watches him climb the scaffolding, finds something that enrages him, and right off. Phil tells Troy that Frank wanted to use the windmill in House of Satan 2. Then Danny shows up in the same motorbike gear from the windmill. Troy leaves and finds that the air has been let out of his tires. Ooh! The next day, Darren, who gave the detectives the wrong movie, he actually gave them The Shining,
It really was.
approaches them and says he has something to share on record. He confesses that he let the air out of Troy's tires. He also says that he saw Danny and Phil fighting over money. Turns out Darren likes to lurk, and that he likes to video things as he lurks. He shows them a video from a party during the filming of the movie that shows Frank fighting with Sarah. Then the tape cuts into an older clip showing Danny and Phil riding identical motorbikes. Turns out they are the best of friends, and they have had a falling out. The detectives head to the windmill, where Barnaby finds what Danny found, a card that says Judas. Meanwhile, Rupert meets with Danny, who tells him the murders must stop and has him hunting for something in Lower Warden. Now the detectives decide they need to talk to the vicar's wife, who is bluntly honest with them. Finally. She says Wendy is stupid but sensitive and wouldn't cheat on Rupert. However, she slept with Frank over 2 decades ago, and that Larry is actually Frank's son. That's why the vicar hated Frank and Larry, but never talked about it because British. She also says that the vicar is probably not the killer, but is probably super cool with what has been done. It's back uphill to Lower Warden for another chat with Sarah. She admits to being Belle's great-granddaughter, hence her devotion to his memory and his message. She says that the Smythe-Websters tried to stop the publishing of the book all those years ago, and now they've defiled it. She also admits to an affair decades ago with Rupert and says the video shows Frank refusing to give the museum a donation. She also says that Danny knows how to do electrical wiring, which causes them to race back to the estate because they've now finally got to talk to him. Too late. Danny's dead, drowned in gazpacho. His only visitor that morning had been Rupert, so Barnaby goes off to question him. Rupert says that with the death of Larry, this is the end of the line for the family. Rupert had the snip back when he was younger at Sarah's insistence. So the plan is to bulk up the estate's value and then sell it and live happily ever after. I mean, he likes Danny. Never considered him as an heir. Barnaby tells him that Danny is dead, which leaves Rupert stunned. Like, more stunned for Danny than for any other person who's died so far, because everybody likes Danny. They find Danny's mom's diary, and after reading it, race back to the museum. There they find a very upset Phil and Sarah going through a bag of gazpacho clothes. Phil runs for it, but Troy has let the air out of his tires. Wah, wah. So they arrest him. Rupert shows up with that fancy shotgun, wanting revenge just for Danny.
It's weird.
Yeah. So this is the time when Barnaby gives the reveal. Everyone may have liked Danny, but he's still a garbage human being and the worst of the lot. He was the brains behind the whole thing. Phil and Danny had worked out a blackmail scheme, ostensibly for money for the museum. Phil was irate that Frank had dared to laugh at Sarah, his mother. They stole the explosives. Danny gave the signal, and Phil triggered the bomb with a remote control. When Frank reneged on the promise to pay, they electrocuted him on the bike. They next planned to pressure Rupert, but the pair argued, and Danny let slip that Rupert is Phil's dad, having learned it from reading in his mom's diary. That means Phil would inherit everything, so Danny had actually engineered all of this so that Phil would be implicated, but not himself, and Danny could then inherit the lot, not knowing that Rupert didn't like him that much. Phil killed Danny, and probably would have killed Rupert too at this point because he knows they would have found some way to screw him out of the inheritance. Afterwards, Rupert tries to reconcile with Sarah. A little too late there. Barnaby finishes the original House of Satan and says that he should have read it sooner because the protagonist's name in the book was Phil Harrison. Okay, so very convoluted back half.
Yeah.
The first half it's a slow walk, and then the second half it's a sprint.
Yeah, there's a lot of information in that second half that we didn't have in the first half.
Yeah.
You don't know that you don't meet Sarah until the second half.
Yep.
You don't know that Phil is her son until way later.
You don't even know you don't even know the difference between the movie and the book until much later in the episode. It's a big distinction between the two, and yet I think it's 45. I think I wrote down at the 45-minute mark somewhere in there. It's what is this movie about? No one has actually said what this, what is this? What is the book of, what is any of that stuff about? Because no one's been really clear about the plot.
Yeah.
Speaking of plots, so I'm still trying to wrap my head a little bit around Danny and Phil's plan. So did they ask the Smythe-Websters for money and they said no, and then they blew up the guy, then they tried to blackmail him some more? Or did they blow him up and then try to blackmail him?
It seemed like they blew him up as a warning because, apparently they knew that unlike Danny, nobody liked Larry.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't be missed. And then they decided then they asked for the money. But then they didn't get the money, so they killed Frank.
Yeah, see, there's a step missing somewhere. Also, if they had asked the money. Like, I don't know what the holdover was on the Smythe-Websters, that they were
Yeah.
trying to, like, you owe the museum money.
Yeah.
Well, like that, and then they blew up. Like, I guess what my question is, if the ask was only about money for the museum, right?
Yeah.
What's to stop the Smythe-Websters from, like, spilling this to Troy and Barnaby?
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, it's clearly these lower warden hooligans that have blown up our family member and are trying to hit us. More importantly, trying to get money from us. Arrest them.
Yeah.
Instead, they do their convoluted plan of giving him an empty bag and writing "screw you."
Yeah.
And I love the reaction when like, you don't see who's riding the motorbike at that point, but when they get the bag and there's that very visible the shaking of the hands.
Yeah.
How dare they?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very convoluted plan that I guess ultimately, I guess it feels it's just like Danny is much smarter, much more conniving, luring Phil into basically a trap. Like, I guess the plan makes the most sense from Danny's perspective, right? Is kill Larry, then ask for money, because then you have Phil.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me like the idea would then be, well, we kill him and then ask for the money. Well, the Smythe-Webster, like, logically, the Smythe-Websters would go to the cops.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the evidence would eventually lead them back to Phil.
Yeah. But the thing is, with Phil being illegitimate, he would not be entitled to any of the family money anyway, unless Rupert knew about it, which he didn't, and decided to include him. Yeah.
But that's just it. There's no heirs.
Yeah, there are no heirs. Even, because then, unless he wouldn't be an automatic heir. If Rupert found out that he was his son, which he didn't know, he could include him in the will and make him his heir, but he wouldn't be automatically entitled to anything.
No, but he could challenge it in court, I guess. And, because as he's Rupert's son, Rupert's lord of the manor, which means he gets, like, he's the one in charge of all the finances, everything. So if he passes on, it goes to Phil.
But even he didn't know it until Danny told him.
But Phil didn't even really know until Danny told him.
Yeah.
And then I think he was just going to kill Rupert out of spite. That one scene when he's arrested is like, so long, Daddy.
Yeah.
Can we talk again? We didn't mention it so far, but I really have to say is that Alex Lowe does a really strong job as Phil in this role. Like, he really plays up the resentment well.
Yeah.
He really, he goes from likable to, like, he never plays it evil. He plays it as a guy who's angry, who's in pain.
Yeah. You don't know all that backstory and all the resentment until later on, because he does that first scene between him and Danny is very friendly. You don't get any animosity at all towards them, and you don't even get that there's a plot between them, because I watched that scene several times just to see how that played.
Yeah, but I also don't think the animosity develops after the murder of Frank. Like, I think that's when at some point Phil has realized that something's not right here, that Danny's playing him. Yeah. That's where the Judas card comes, because he's, Danny's a traitor. Yeah. Because I think maybe Danny has probably shot his mouth off that, like, he's going to get, he's probably in line to get the money.
Yeah.
And because it all comes down to class resentment. This is all about not just family resentment, because Phil doesn't really know. Danny knows. But Danny doesn't care, because all he wants is the money. Like, for Phil, this is basically, his motivation is, these upper class jerks laughed at my mother, and I'm tired of it. They take everything. They try to take our dignity. I'm blowing up this actor. Yeah. I'm going to electrocute this guy. It feels vengeful, and not quite for imaginary crimes, but it definitely just feels like this is the vengeance of people who've had to take it on the chin for a very long time.
Yeah.
That said, it's like, it is like the way they sort of explain the plot, it's very confusing.
Yeah. One thing that confused me is Rupert and Danny, when he tells Danny that the killings have to stop, and he obviously at that point doesn't know that Danny is the murderer, but it feels like he is in some sort of plot with him to stop the murders by paying somebody or something, or maybe Danny says, but it seems like something was left out.
There was something left out, and I believe what that, like, I'm going with kind of just filling in, like, sort of what logically would make sense is I'm guessing Rupert is sending Danny to find out who's behind this, not knowing that Danny's behind this.
Yeah.
Because again, everyone likes Danny, so Danny wouldn't do this. Danny wouldn't do this to his friend Rupert, so it's clearly got to be somebody else. So Danny is the one who's like, he's, hey, Danny, why don't you go? Can you go and find out who's doing this, and let's put a stop to it?
Yeah.
Not realizing that it's Danny. So I think now we need to talk about Danny. The central line of this show is everybody likes Danny. And did you like Danny?
I can see that he comes across as a very likable guy, very superficial. If I were Joyce and I were talking to him at that thing, I would have liked Danny. But the further you get into him, you get that kind of hidden snark that he's, and maybe it's, I'm not sure how to put this because it's kind of a mean girl thing.
Well, I didn't like Danny. I didn't like Danny from the start, and it's not because I remembered he was involved. It's because he oozed used car salesman charm. Like he oozed that sort of like, I'm your buddy, but I it's not real. Mm-hmm. And that's why I don't get like everyone like Danny. Is just like every scene he's in with other people, he's got that oozy, broy used car salesman charm. But
Sarah sees through him when she says that's his problem. He wants to be liked because he knows that if everybody likes him, people will do as he wants them to do.
Right.
Like a used car salesman. And used car salesmen sell cars. It works.
Yeah. But it's also like used car salesmen, you're not hanging around them 24/7.
Yeah.
Like you're not like that's a thing that they turn on. Like they turn on because that's part of the job. Like if you're having to live like that, I feel like it just at some point it becomes very clear that it's a ruse. It's a performance. Yeah. I don't know. I just didn't like him as a character. The actor was great. The actor was great in the role. But like from the very first moment, I just didn't. I didn't like. Like I liked Phil.
Yeah,
I liked Phil. Like Phil was genuinely likable, even though he's like he doesn't like everybody. But yeah, I didn't like Danny.
He's a sociopath. He's a sociopath.
I have a thought, by the way, and I'm going to throw this out to the Welcome to Midsomer listeners. But I have been kicking around the idea of like doing a Welcome to Midsomer T-shirt. And I have a two-prong idea. I would like to do a Welcome to Midsomer T-shirt that says, "I liked Danny" or "I didn't like Danny." Something just for the fans of the show and the fans of this show. But I would also, if I did this, I would like to do this where we donate a large chunk of the profits to charity. And I know Fiona Dolman does a lot of charity work, and I would be happy to create a T-shirt that we would sell to our listeners and donate whatever profits, like taking off the cost of the shirts and like that, the profits to a Fiona Dolman charity. So if that is something you would be interested to, listeners, please write to us, let us know on our social media, because I think that would be just kind of a fun way. And also I'm trying to imagine like Fiona Dolman going like getting to the check, like, who the hell's Danny?
We could always donate it to the Ellis Bell Museum. They could use some cash.
It's not real. It's not real. Eileen, it's a TV show.
Damn it.
Midsummer's not a real place.
It is a real place.
No, Midsomer is probably a real place. You don't want to go there either.
Yeah, no.
So if you would like us to create a T-shirt for charity that says "I didn't like Danny" or "I liked Danny" with the Welcome to Midsomer logo, we will happily do it. It's just got to see if we get enough people that like it's actually worth the cost of getting the shirts made. So
yeah. All right.
I just thought that's an idea that's just starting to say, I didn't like Danny. I just imagine going, who's Danny? By the way,
welcome to Midsomer.
Yeah, what's Welcome to Midsomer? What's Dan? Huh? But I will say this: it takes a really long time to drown somebody.
It does take a long time to drown somebody. That's the thing that's that struck out to me. And I know that Phil is a very physically imposing guy and looks very strong, but it takes a lot of, I mean, people don't drown in 30 seconds.
Yeah, and that's not a big pot of gazpacho. Like, that's a big, like, Danny could also just have been like, could have just pushed it.
Yeah. Now, if he had hit him on the head and then drowned him in the gazpacho, that would have worked.
That would have made more sense.
Yeah.
Maybe they did, and they just edited it funny. I don't know. Can we talk about the detective work in this episode?
Yeah.
I thought Nettles gave a very weird Barnaby performance this time.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it comes, like, he dances around the Smythe-Websters a lot up through the first half. He's just very polite.
Yeah.
He doesn't really probe questions. And then the second half, he's just like, I've had enough. Like, you guys are not working with me. And then he does things like asking rude sex questions to Wendy on the street.
On the street. Yeah.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
That was a little rude.
But I love his scenes with Anne Reid.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, I mean, those are two actors really working well together. And actually, I love his scene in the church with Sarah. She's great, but he is also tones it down and lets her do what she needs to do in that scene. Yeah,
no, second half, he's back to being Barnaby. It's that first half where he's just like, okay, we're just sitting here. We're just like, it just seems to be like second half Barnaby would point out to the people as they're all sitting there, sipping there. She's like, you guys don't really seem that broken up.
Yeah.
He didn't seem to want to ask them any questions. And it was very weird.
Yeah.
Also, I kind of love the interaction between them and Darren. Video night at the video night in Coston.
Love that scene. That scene is so fun. And talk about a Wes Anderson kind of very symmetrical.
Mm-hmm.
Troy just like bored out of his mind. Danny eager and Barnaby just so intense.
Yeah.
I just loved it.
Oh yeah, but also just like the weird goofy Troy's scene with Darren, like there was like definitely just like trying to be like a leading detective and just failing miserably. Like Darren is in many ways like it's like Troy thinks he's in control, but Darren is completely in control.
Without meaning to be.
Yeah.
Because Darren's a total loser, but he's such a lovable loser. I love him.
They didn't explain how a kid who was videotaping an explosion on a crime scene got to leave the crime scene.
With the video, yes.
With the video.
Yeah. That should have been the first thing they grabbed. Yeah.
Some sloppy police work is when Barnaby goes to the windmill and the motorbike guy looks at the thing on the scaffolding.
Yeah.
And it drives off.
Yeah.
Barnaby does not go up that scaffolding and see what he looks at until the following. It's still there the following day.
Yeah.
But it's just like, why wouldn't you just do that now?
Yeah.
Just do it now. It was such a weird thing. It was like, I guess we got to go back to the windmill. It's like, man, if you just checked the night before, you would have saved yourself a good couple hours.
Yeah.
And there was one. I don't think it's meant to be sort of a weird faux pas, but so the scene where they discover Danny, right? And Danny's lying on the floor, and the floor is covered in what we learn is gazpacho. It looks like it's supposed to look like blood, but it's gazpacho, so it's red. Yeah. But as they are walking through, they're clearly walking through this, like where we've seen the bodies laying and the floor, and where the floor is covered in the sort of the wet gazpacho. The audio, like the Foley work for the footsteps. It's on completely dry. It's like the click of like your shoes on like a hard, dry surface. And there is no like literally they would have been walking through the gazpacho and there is no splashing. There is no sounds of like they're actually stepping in water. It popped out to me as they're doing this, going, why is there? Because the footsteps are so loud. Because it's supposed to be a silent scene, so they have these really loud footsteps. But it's just like click, 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 and there should have been splish, splish,
splish, yeah,
and nothing.
Yeah. So let's talk about one of our favorite subjects: bookstore porn.
Oh my God, that bookstore in Upper Warden. So listeners, Eileen and I, as much as we would say we love to, we make a living at this. We actually do this for fun. We work in the book industry, book publishers, and so when we see bookstores like that bookstore in Upper Warden, I was personally like, can we just have the rest of the episode set inside this book, like just the camera just walking around this bookshop, because I loved that bookshop.
Yeah.
And then they make a big point about the two versions of the book, which honestly, I get them like taking the title of the thing and turning it into horror. Why would they write a whole nother book?
And make it a hardcover because, as we know, movie tie-ins are always paperback.
Oh yeah, and they also don't tend to write like whole other book. I mean, they do movie novelizations and everything like that.
Yeah.
It was just it was just kind of a weird, like, there's two versions of the book, and like we only sell this version and this. I mean, that just seems like you're leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
Have both versions.
Yeah.
So dumb.
Yeah. And then there was the whole idea of it being the highest grossing UK finance movie in the last decade. So that would be from around 1993 to 2003, which would totally ignore a couple little movies. The first one in 1994 was Four Weddings and a Funeral that made worldwide $245 million. That would have made Larry a Hugh Grant type star.
Yeah.
Larry Smith. I don't think he was. And then, of course, there was Train Spotting from 1996, which made $72 million. Those are just two examples from that decade. That, I think, would have outperformed House of Satan.
Yeah. It was like a weird little factoid they threw in. It's just like, yeah, so this movie made more money than Four Weddings and a Funeral. Okay.
Yeah. And there would have been a lot more national media, not just the local media, if, say, a Hugh Grant type star had gotten blown up in a summer house.
Yeah.
Which I have to say is one of the best openings of any Midsomer episode.
It is a great opening.
Yeah.
It's just because it is like sort of unexpected. It's like, this is going to get stabbed. No, blown up.
Blown up.
It's so out of the, because it's like, I think it's one of the, if it's not the only, it's only a couple of real explosions they've ever had, like pyrotechnics they've ever had on Midsomer.
Yeah. We're used to much less dramatic murders.
Yeah. Because it is such a huge topic. In this episode, we're going to go to, for Eileen, Better Dead Than Red Becker's History Corner. We're talking about communism and socialism in the UK.
All right. So the ideas of socialism in Britain built on a tradition that extends back before the English Civil War, which did see the temporary overthrow of the monarchy in 1649. But there had previously been major peasant revolts in England in 1381, 1450, 1451, and 1549, all of which had been suppressed. However, a major change happened in Britain starting in the mid-18th century, when it changed from a mostly agrarian nation to an industrialized one. Rural peasants became the urban working class. We also see the change from medieval guilds to trade unions, as well as a rise in workplace militancy with the Luddite movement, which destroyed textile machinery. The Chartist movement was the first mass revolutionary movement of the British working class. It petitioned Parliament for universal suffrage for men, the secret ballot, electoral districts representing equal numbers of people, crazy notion there, and other parliamentary reforms such as removing the property requirements for members. Though resisted, these reforms were gradually and probably grudgingly enacted, and they got the workday down to 10 hours! Though born in Germany in 1818, Karl Marx left that country in 1843 to go to Paris to work for a radical left-wing newspaper. There he met Friedrich Engels, and they wrote the Manifesto of the Communist Party in 1848. Eventually, they both ended up in London in 1849, where they would live for the rest of their lives. Marx died in London in 1883. In addition to his work in putting together Marx's Das Kapital after his friend's death, Engels also wrote The Condition of the Working Class in England in 1845 and Socialism, Utopian and Scientific in 1880. Engels died in London in 1895. Initially, Marxism had little influence on British political thought, despite the literal Dickensian living conditions of the working class. The Social Democratic Federation was not formed until 1882. In the early 1900s, splits in the SDF produced the Socialist Party of Great Britain, which is still in existence, and the Socialist Labour Party, which dissolved in 1980 under the stern gaze of Margaret Thatcher. The Labour Party was also founded around this time, an alliance of representatives from the International Labour Party, the Social Democratic Federation, and trade unions. Fear of communist uprisings was high in the UK after the Bolshevik Revolution, with the monarchy afraid that they could go the way of Cousin Nicky and his family. Meanwhile, the Labour Party continued to grow, with the first Labour Prime Minister in 1924. However, the socialist movement was fairly fractured and disorganized. After World War II, Labour came back into power and reforms such as the National Health Service were established. The Communist Party of Great Britain was founded in 1920, in the strife and mass unemployment after the First World War. In 1926, it organized a general strike, which was an unsuccessful attempt to prevent wage reductions for coal miners. It reached its height during the Great Depression and again in the days after the Second World War. However, the brutal suppression of the Hungarian uprising of 1956 by the Soviets dealt a blow to communist parties in the UK and around the world. After that, British communists mainly served as villains in British spy novels and thrillers. The party dissolved in 1991 under the not-quite-so-withering gaze of John Major. Other socialist and communist ideology parties in the UK include the Workers' Revolutionary Party, founded in 1947, the Scottish National Party, 1934, the Social Democratic and Labour Party, 1970, and People Before Profit in 2005. I can kind of imagine Sarah Prouty really going for that People Before Profit party.
Do you think by having them as Sarah being a communist and raising Phil in that way, do you think that there's, again, some, as I said, like, it definitely felt like the writers were in the sort of the class struggles. It just felt like they were like the Smythe-Websters seemed to be the more preferred brand. And it just also feels like by making them communists, again, this is sort of yeah, sure, they're poor, but look, they're communists. They want to take everything and they're going to kill you. It felt like in the class struggle that maybe the writer, the producers were a little more on the upper class side.
Maybe. But I think Anne Reid's performance put more of the audience sympathy in sympathy with the People's Republic of Lower Warden, as she calls it.
Well, that's just it. Is that that's the thing is like the Lower Warden people have human reactions to things.
Yeah.
Like the closest that Rupert has of any kind of reaction is when he finds out that Danny is dead and he wants to go get revenge for Danny, not Larry.
His
brother. Not his grandson or his nephew, not his brother, his schmoozy guy who worked in his house.
Yeah.
It's almost like being poor is an infection that just gets into it's a parasite that crawls into you and you just can't live without it. So Troy got a few nice moments in this episode, as we mentioned, his interviews with Darren, his pool party with Phil and Danny, where they mockingly call him Minnesota Troy.
Yeah.
Which I kind of loved.
Yeah.
There's a moment where he has to, like, someone's bad-mouthing cops. He's and then he pulls out. He really loves flashing his badge in that moment.
Yeah.
He's like, what are you saying?
Yeah. Yeah. As for Corner, there's not a lot of Bullock, but nope. He does get in some fun lines.
He's the best one. Obviously during the bomb sequence, the best one is he describes the victim as somewhat dispersed.
Yeah, that's
and implies he's been scooping him up into a bag. I really there was a part of me that just wished they had just like a quick cut of like a trash bag.
Yeah.
Found another one. Yeah, look, Bullock, like this Bullock is like sprinkled in this a little bit with a little bit of flavor. Also, it seems like, how does Bullock not notice the scorch marks?
Yeah.
That's a very un-Bullocky thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fleur would have noticed.
Yeah. But it's also one of those episodes where he's down in the basement with the satanic experience, doing the work that's not normally for a coroner, but more for the, crime scene detectives.
Well, Barry Jackson has said in the interview where conducted after he was unceremoniously cut from Midsomer, that his character went from country doctor to coroner to sort of the crime scene tech guy, because God forbid they hire another actor for that role.
They could have given it to the poor actor who plays detective standing in the corner. Yeah.
Yeah, we got Brett Rylander just waiting there off screen. Can happily play. He's going to happily play lab tech guy.
Yep.
Let's wrap it up. Final thoughts on A Tale of Two Hamlets?
I like this episode more than I think I should. And I think it's because there's a weirdness to it, as we've said, and there are some really nice performances.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, Anne Reid is very much a stand-up, but I think there are some other really good ones in there, too.
Yeah, it's like Midsummer's always weird. There's something in the characterizations in this episode that also just it's like Lower Warden, Upper Warden is just full of oddballs.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of this. It reminded me a little bit of this great old documentary from Errol Morris, like an early Errol Morris film he did called Vernon, Florida, where he is in a small town in Florida and interviewing all these just weird little oddballs running through that town. And that's a little bit. There's a little bit of that flavor to this, and just between Darren and Phil and the two different journalists and all that stuff. They're weird. It's weirdly written, set up weird, but it works. Like it works really well, and it's fun. And Anne Reid obviously is the glue that holds this one together. Mm-hmm. She really gives a grounded, real performance in like she has staked herself into the ground, and the weirdness that swirls around her, she gives it a context, and she gives it stakes.
Yeah.
So thumbs up for me on A Tale of Two Hamlets.
Yes, me too.
And that's everything we wanted to talk about. We want to thank everyone for listening. If you have anything you want to discuss about A Tale of Two Hamlets or Midsomer Murders, or let us know about that T-shirt idea. That could be a fun thing for charity. Feel free to email us at welcometomidsomer@gmail.com. Or if you want us to use the email in the show, just please say so in your email. You can also reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Welcome to Midsomer. And we would love to hear from you in any of those ways. If you are enjoying what you've heard, please consider subscribing to us, rating and reviewing us on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. All of it really helps find us. Tell all your friends about us. Tell them about Midsomer if they're not watching, and then get them to watch Midsomer, and then get them to listen to us. We'll be back next month, so we hope you join us again. And as we take the road out of Midsomer, we want to thank you for listening and remind you that in Midsomer, gazpacho can be murder.
And usually is.
Welcome to Midsomer is produced by Eric Buscher and Eileen Becker. All clips in this podcast are used in compliance with the U.S. Copyrights Act, various exemptions from criticism and commentary. Our logo and podcast art was designed by Smeedrai. Our theme music is by the infamous Space.
After a few
few rears?
We all need a few rears.
Boom.